Critique of Pure Reason, translated by Max Muller, 1881 edition, Part 2, Division 3, of the division of general logic into analytic and dialectic, page 65. What is truth is an old and famous question by which people thought they could drive logicians into a corner and either make them take refuge in a mere circle or make them confess their ignorance and consequently the vanity of their whole art. The nominal definition of truth, that it is the agreement of the cognition with its object, is granted. What is wanted is to know a general and safe criterion of the truth of any and every kind of knowledge. So he says this question of what is truth tends to corner logicians, and it causes them to take refuge in a mere circle, or it makes them confess that they are ignorant to this idea of the truth. And he says the nominal definition of truth has to do with the agreement of our thoughts with its object. So in the sense that for him, truth means the idea that we have in our mind about the nature of the world or an object in front of us, and as well as its agreement with the object itself. So for Kant, truth is not just pure or an idea that we have in our mind, it has to do with also the agreement of our thoughts with the object about which we explore the truth. So what is wanted? What is wanted is to know a general and safe criterion of the truth of any kind and every kind of knowledge in general. So now he wants to look for truth in propositions which describe the generality of every kind of knowledge that we can have. So it is a great and necessary proof of wisdom and sagacity to know what questions may be reasonably asked. For if a question is absurd in itself and calls for an answer where there is no answer, it does not only throw disgrace on the questioner, but often tempts an uncautious listener into absurd answers, thus presenting, as the ancients said, the spectacle of one person milking a he-goat and of another holding the sieve. So he says that in order to derive a general criterion of truth, of pertaining to all kinds of knowledge that we can possess, we need to ask the right kind of questions. So if truth consists in the agreement of knowledge with its object, that object must thereby be distinguished from other objects. For knowledge is untrue if it does not agree with its object, though it contains something which may be affirmed of other objects. So he says that truth means knowledge which is in agreement with its object. But this object must be distinguished from all other objects. And he says knowledge is untrue if it does not agree with its object, though it may contain something which may be affirmed of other objects. For instance, truth can be the truth about color red has to be distinguished from color blue and color black. But it does not mean that the truth of color red is not applicable to other colors. So if I want to know the truth behind color red, I have to first distinguish it from other kinds of colors. Also, the truth that I arrive at about color red may or may not define or be related to other colors. So a general criterion of truth ought really be valid with regard to every kind of knowledge, whatever the objects may be. But now Kant is saying that a general criterion of truth should be valid to every kind of knowledge, whatever the objects may be. A general criterion, but the whole of truth should be in agreement with the object to which it applies. So, but it is clear, so he says, but it is clear as no account is thus taken of the contents of knowledge, relation to its object, while truth concerns these very contents, that it is impossible and absurd to ask for a sign of the truth of the contents of that knowledge, and that therefore a sufficient and at the same time general mark of truth cannot possibly found. So he says truth has to, the knowledge that we consider as truth has to do with the content of it, in the sense that true knowledge has to be in agreement, it has to be related, and it has to be in agreement with the objects that we receive through intuition. So, as we have before called the contents of knowledge its material, it will be right to say that of the truth of the knowledge, so far as its material is concerned, no general mark can be demanded, because it would be self-contradictory. So he says, if we go by the definition of truth, which requires the agreement of a fact that we understand with the object that we observe in the physical world, then we cannot arrive at a general criterion for truth, because it will be self-contradictory. So he says the material aspect of knowledge, which is the content of knowledge, which concerns the object in the physical world, is insufficient to give us any general idea or general truths behind the nature of all kinds of objects that we can understand or know. So, but when we speak of knowledge with reference to its form only, without taking into account its contents, it is equally clear that logic, as it propounds the general and necessary rules of the understanding, must furnish in these rules criterion of truth. So he says that when we speak of knowledge in a clearly logical and formal manner, this cannot be true. This cannot lead us to truth, because it contains merely the necessary rules of understanding, and it does not concern the contents of knowledge. That is, it does not concern the objects that we experience. For whatever contradicts those rules is false, because the understanding would thus contradict the general rules of thought, that is, itself. So he says that anything which contradicts the pure rules, the logical facts that we know about the world, will also contradict understanding itself. So these criteria, however, refer only to the form of thought and of thought in general. They are quite correct so far, but they are not sufficient. So he says that any kind of truth or any kind of proposition or any kind of fact that we can know about the nature of the world, which concerns merely with the form of thought and not with the content of thought, namely the object, is sufficient. It is not sufficient. It is not a sufficient contender for being truth. So for although our knowledge may be in accordance with logical rule, that is, may not contradict itself, it is quite possible that it may be in contradiction with its object. So he says pure knowledge or general logic can lead us to purely logical facts which do not self-contradict each other, but they may be in disagreement, they may find a contradiction when they are applied to objects in the physical world. So therefore, the purely logical criterion of truth, namely the agreement of knowledge with the general and formal laws of understanding and reason, is no doubt a conditio sine qua non, or a negative condition of all truth. So he says that purely logical facts about the nature of the world, which are in agreement with our general and formal laws of understanding, are negative conditions of all truth, in the sense that they are at least one necessary form of what we may call truth, but they are not complete truths, but they are not objectively verified truths. So thus purely logical statements or general logic in general cannot be considered as truth, because they have to be tested. So nonetheless they are negative condition of all truth. But logic can go no further, and it has no test for discovering error with regard to the contents and not the form of a proposition. So he says that logic cannot go as far as checking its errors or even discovering or testing its errors without being applied to contents. So logic, the realm of logic is limited, because we cannot test for discovering the error behind what logic tells us about the nature of the world. That is, general logic is confined to understanding, and in understanding alone we cannot arrive at truths, because truth has to bypass the realm of understanding, and it should also be in agreement. That is, it should also describe in a perfect manner the objects in the physical world that we experience or that we intuit. So logic is not a pure proposition. No, the truth is not a proposition, is not a merely pure or a priori proposition. He says truth has to be a logical proposition, but this logical proposition has to have an element of empiricism or an element of a posteriori in order for it to be considered as complete truth.